Hello everyone and welcome to today's MOBEX webinar, which we are proud to bring to you in association with our knowledge partner, Escrypt. My name is Freddie Holmes, I'm a special correspondent here at Automotive World and I'll be moderating today's session. The title of today's presentation is Protecting Your Firmware Authenticity with CycurHSM, an overview of advanced secure boot concepts, and will be led by Raymond Stamper, who is Lead Product Manager, Embedded Security Software at Escrypt. We will follow the presentation with some audience Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type it into the Q&A box on your screen at any time during the session. The slides from today's presentation and a recording of the event will be made available afterwards. And with that, I will hand over to today's expert speaker to get us started. Raymond, over to you.
Thank you. So hello and welcome again to our today's HSM webinar, Protecting Your Firmware Authenticity with CycurHSM, with the subtitle that we give you an overview of the advanced secure boot concepts. Let me first start with a short introduction to Escrypt and to myself. So my name is Raymond Stamper. I'm a product manager for Escrypt's embedded security software portfolio, including Escrypt's flagship product, CycurHSM. Before I joined Escrypt, I worked at several companies and also in several roles, from an embedded software developer to application engineer for microcontrollers, system engineer, then managing projects, teams, departments, products for embedded software development in the industrial and in the automotive area. Escrypt started 2003 as a spin-off of the University Bochum in Germany and has since then grown to the leading provider of IT security solutions in embedded systems, consulting and services for enterprise security and IT protected production with offices at 19 locations around the globe and more than 400 employees. Escrypt cooperates closely with leading OEMs and Tier 1s to define and implement advanced security concepts. Before going deeper into the use cases and specific features we would like to present today, I would like to give you a one-slide recap about the product we are talking about here, the CycurHSM. For details and more information about the product itself, please see our webpage and also the HSM webinar from 2019 on our Escrypt homepage, which gives a general introduction. So CycurHSM is an embedded security stack for microcontrollers or also microprocessors, which are equipped with an integrated embedded hardware security module, the so-called HSM. CycurHSM consists of the firmware running on the HSM processor, as well as drivers and interfaces on the host side, up to the crypto driver for smooth integration into any AUTOSAR stack, and also optional host-sided components for specific OEMs to integrate the stack smoothly into any host system. CycurHSM is the market-leading solution and it's predominantly used in the automotive sector, but of course it can be also used and is also used in the industrial sector. Now to the agenda for today. We will start with typical challenges for securing software authenticity. Next, we will dive into best practices for your application software design to protect the authenticity. We will then discuss the critical points in the design which could be exploited by attackers and how to reduce the attack surface within other design constraints, like, for example, performance and safety. And finally, we will show a typical real-life example with harsh constraints and how its specific design challenges have been overcome. We end today with the Q&A session. So coming now to the first point, And let me start with a rather Shakespeare-ish philosophical question. Authenticity or update capability? Is that the question? A non-updatable ECU software which has been authenticated once will stay authenticated forever. So this sounds basically like a good plan, but is it really a good plan? New attacks might come up to read out data, for example, and new vulnerabilities might get identified during the lifetime of the ECU, which could be 20 years or even more with electric cars. So a non-updatable software is insecure in long term. So the only response here is to fix these vulnerabilities by an update. From next year onwards, the worldwide regulation UNECE Work Package 29 will come into effect, which makes updates, including updates for the security firmware itself, in the field mandatory. So updating is a good plan, but asking again, is it really a good plan? With the update capability, you open the door for attacks. New software is played in and the authenticity information needs to be changed, which is always a critical point for attacks. So the actual question here is, how can we combine update capability with keeping authenticity? The HSM, the hardware security module, is the source of trust, also called the trust anchor. What's in the HSM is supposed to be the truth to check and validate against. The HSM data flash, which you can see here at the bottom, contains information required to validate the authenticity of the host software, which is located in the host flash. If the system needs to be updated, the HSM cannot handle that alone. One reason is that the HSM is not connected to the network for security reasons, for example. So for an update, the software on the host needs to be executed to receive the update, to authenticate it, and to update the authenticity information in the HSM data flash. Of course, all of this has to be done with supporting functions from the HSM. That means the host core and the host application, or a part of the host application, needs to be involved in the update process. However, the host is not regarded as a trust anchor. It means that a part of the trust anchor needs to be transferred to the host, and this is done in form of the so-called primary bootloader. The primary bootloader must be authentic. There are some methods to achieve that. One very popular is that it is first authenticated by the HSM before started. An authentic primary bootloader is the absolute minimum requirement, because only by this the trust anchor can be really extended to the host. The primary bootloader part of the software can be also protected by a flash protection password. We will also come to that later. Now we have a part on the host which is trusted, the primary bootloader. This part is now capable to participate in the update process. That means to change information in the HSM trust anchor, like the authenticity information. When receiving a new software update container on the host side, the software authenticity is checked by asymmetric cryptography. That means one public key and individual private keys on each side. And signatures will be checked versus certificates obtained from a PKI. So this is good and secure approach if there are no critical real-time requirements. However, now this software received needs to be programmed and the authenticity information needs to be updated. The authenticity information is required also at the startup of the ECU. At ECU startup, the authenticity needs to be checked as well to ensure that nothing has been modified during the update process. However, for the boot up use case, for the startup use case, there are hard real-time requirements. So for a fast authentication, it is necessary to utilize the available crypto hardware on the hardware platform and to transfer the relatively slow asymmetric cryptography used for the authentication between the PKI and the host into a symmetric authentication. And to use, for example, also here for the symmetric cryptography, the hardware accelerators of the hardware platform, for example, the AES engine, which is a standard in any microcontroller equipped with an integrated HSM. The Trust Anchor extension, the primary bootloader, converts the relatively slow asymmetric crypto-based authentication into the symmetric crypto-based host flash authenticity information, which is then written back to the HSM data flash. Even when using symmetric cryptography utilizing the hardware accelerators, the startup performance requirements are hard to achieve in many applications. Typical ECU startup times are, for example, between 50 milliseconds and 600 milliseconds, depending on the use case and the application. For example, is it a powertrain application or other safety application or something else? And here we come to the CycurHSM trusted boot features and best practices for your application software design to tackle those still existing challenges. To recap, the goal of trusted boot is that only authentic software is executed, even when the software has been updated. To cope with the challenges outlined in the section before, CycurHSM provides a set of functions, modes, and also configuration options that allow the user to ensure that only authentic software is executed on the host processor, and that any, let's say, malicious software is detected before and during runtime. So not only during the startup, but also during the runtime. This last point means that these functions could not only be executed during startup, but also in regular intervals during the operation. This is the so-called runtime manipulation detection feature. So here's a short summary now on this page of the major trusted boot features CycurHSM is supporting. First, CycurHSM is logging the detection of a non-authentic software part. Non-authentic software could also include software parts which have been erased. Next, CycurHSM is reacting on the failed validation. A reaction could be, for example, locking keys or other secure data elements, stop sending authentic messages on the bus, inform the host, who then could decide how to react depending on the failure type, or even a reaction could be to reset the whole system by the HSM itself. Locking keys means that a key cannot be accessed anymore. How and if keys are locked can be configured individually, means per key by the key properties. We will come to that later in the implementation concept also. Usually, the host reacts on failures informed by the HSM. However, there are also cases where it might be desired and accepted by the overall system security safety concept that the HSM is reacting on failure directly up to doing a system reset. So CycurHSM has a couple of different boot modes who differ in two major dimensions. On the x-axis here, you can see that the checks can either be triggered by the host application or by the HSM itself. On the y-axis, the booting can happen in parallel or sequentially. In your design, the mode should be selected which fulfills both your timing requirements and your security requirements. Means there is no, and that's the reason why CycurHSM provides a full set of selectable and configurable options. I will now go through these options or these modes and give some more explanation, starting with the secure boot on the right bottom side. Here the HSM starts first and the host is held in suspend. The host starts only after successful validation of all software parts. This is very easy to implement and very secure. However, it strongly delays the boot up time since HSM needs to be fully operational and the host software needs to be validated completely before execution. Then on the other extreme here, we have the authenticated boot. This is actually the most widely used boot mode. Here, host and HSM start up simultaneously. The HSM boots and enters core mode. Core mode means full functionality, including CMAC calculation, for example, while the host initializes. Then the host requests the HSM to check given software parts. There are no autonomous checks done in advance by the HSM at the boot time. The first host software part who will trigger the first check must be authentic itself. This can be realized by setting that software part to OTP, means one-time programmable. However, this is not really recommended anymore at all. There are, with today's microcontrollers, there are other ways, like using the flash protection feature of the device, if available on that device, and this will, let's say, lock the partition with a 256-bit password, usually, and this password resides in the HSM data flash, the secure data flash. And this whole process can be supported. The flash protection and unlocking, the locking and the unlocking can be protected by HSM functions. So this is a much better way because it will allow you also to update the primary bootloader if it is necessary. You remember from the beginning that it might be necessary at some point of time in the future to update even that part. So the authentic boot implementation is much more complex, but the startup time will be much faster because the host can start initializations almost at the same time when the HSM starts. Of course, this has also some drawbacks because both cores might want to access same resources, for example, same memory at the same time. The host for doing memory checks, self-checks, safety checks, whatever. The HSM also to do some work, reorganization or whatever. So this needs a well thought through design concept here. Furthermore, there's a small window where the HSM is in core mode and checks have not been started, means secrets are available. That means the host initialization part must be authentic and as short and simple as possible. Then in between we have two modes which are compromising between those both extremes. The first one is here named with AAB, which is the abbreviation for the autonomous authenticated boot. Here, still, the host and HSM start up simultaneously, same as for the authenticated boot. However, now some software parts, those who are configured as such, are checked autonomously by the HSM. For the other software parts, the host triggers the check similarly to the authenticated boot. So the HSM boots here is doing the configure checks before entering the core mode, all in parallel to the host initialization. So the advantage here is that compared to the authenticated boot, no secrets are exposed at any time. The disadvantage is that it increases the time the CycurHSM needs for booting into its core application because some checks are done in between. So you can imagine that those checks should be kept as short as possible for an optimum boot up time. That means those software parts should be as short and simple as possible. For example, the boot manager should be as short and simple as possible. Then we have the trusted boot. So this is maybe a little bit confusing here from the terminology. So we are speaking about trusted boot in general, but we also have a mode who is named trusted boot. Here the HSM starts first and the host is held in suspense. This is the same as for the secure boot mode. But this is in difference to the autonomous authenticated boot mode. The host starts only after successful validation of all software parts which have been configured for ahead of time verification. So not for all software parts as for the secure boot, but only for specific software parts. And then after that, after the host has been released, the host may trigger verification for further software parts. Here we also have several sub-modes, for example, the gracious modes. The gracious mode here, which means the HSM will report errors and log secrets immediately, but still the host, when started up, when he will be started, will take action on the reported errors. So the advantage here is that the validation results are immediately available when the host starts. The host can still do some safety actions when they are necessary, which would be maybe not necessary if the HSM will not release the host at all. And you remember the HSM does not have access to all peripheral functions. It is kind of isolated from the host and many peripherals for security reasons. However, this mode also is of course delaying the host startup. Since the HSM has to check whether software parts are configured for secure boot, check them before releasing the host, and then the host needs to start up, and then the host might trigger further checks. Any of these possible configurations need to be evaluated in regards to the user to your timing requirements. So we are recommending here to perform use case specific measurements for the purpose of timing evaluation. Now to the point, how is this all realized? Let's now come back to the picture from the beginning and dive a little bit deeper into the design concept. So the authenticity information for each software part is stored securely in the HSM data flash, in a so-called trusted boot table. It contains information about where the software part is located, the length of the software part, if and when the software shall be checked, what shall happen at detection of non-authentic software, results of the last checks, reference value to compare against, and so on and so on. The user defines the software parts that are checked by the HSM. When creating a table entry, the HSM calculates an AES, the reference value, in AES in a CMAC, using the hardware accelerator for the given address range. Each table entry represents a continuous memory region in the host program flash, the P flash, that it used for CMAC calculation. The AES key used for calculating the CMAC is an ECU-specific random key created by the silicon vendor, so-called ROM key. This is a special separate key which is only available to the HSM and only used for trusted boot and thus considered secure. It is also, let's say, unique per device. That means it will be different on the next ECU. So even if you have the same ECU type from the same vendor, these keys will always differ, and therefore it makes secure. So if you break into one ECU, you might not be able to break into the next ECU. Important here is that the HSM, let's say, debugger protections are properly, let's say, configured. We will come to this later also when we talk about attacks. So coming now to some best practices, how to configure the software and how to partition it for trusted boot. So by smartly splitting the software parts, the boot up time can be optimized while keeping the system secure and also safe. The typical parts are the bootloader on the top here, the boot manager, then testing and safety checks, and then the rest of the application in several partitions, usually more than just two. This is just a simplified diagram here. The dark blue part, the bootloader, should be always secure boot protected. And the bootloader should be kept as minimal as possible to reduce the attack surface to the absolute minimum and also to optimize the startup time. The same requirement holds for the boot manager, which should be also kept to the absolute minimum required functions in your design. The boot manager should be secure boot protected, but could be also authenticated boot protected for timing optimizations. The next part are the self-checks and safety checks, where we are facing special challenges, like let's say parallel accesses, for example. So this should be separated in a separate partition and also treated especially here. During the testing and the safety checks, potential conflicts could come up with the HSM running in parallel. So it might be needed to execute the HSM in RAM for some time, which is supported by a security critical function, the so-called HSM suspend function, in order to realize and to make this possible. In the green part, so when switching from the blue part to the green part, security critical functions must be deactivated. The reason for that is that the application has now a much higher security attack surface. So here the HSM suspend function, for example, must be disabled. The blue-green line can be set dynamically. When the green part gets activated, the trust anchor cannot be modified anymore by disabling the security critical functions. That means the trusted boot table cannot be modified anymore. An HSM update, so updating the HSM itself, cannot be modified anymore. The HSM cannot be put into suspend mode anymore, and so on. So the HSM update function is not part of today's session. Of course, it is also supported by the CycurHSM. We have a fail-safe HSM update mechanism here. Okay, so now coming to the point why your boot manager is the major attack point. As shown on the last slide, the light blue part is the part where attackers focus on, the boot manager. So reason is that during this phase, the security critical functions are still active and the functionality is extended compared to the primary bootloader. For example, a boot manager might have already a connection to the bus and might be already able to send and receive messages. So again, maybe I should notice here that sometimes the terminology is different in regards to bootloader and boot manager, so please do not get confused if in your specific OEM security requirements the naming might be different. So a typical variant of a host of how a software update is triggered is that a software update request comes in at the normal operation, and this sets a flag for the next reset. So the primary bootloader is checking this flag and after the next reset. But it's also possible that a message via CAN bus comes in to switch to the update path directly. The primary bootloader decides if a software update is requested or not. The update yes path is the critical path which starts at the yes, the decision here in the flow diagram. The update no path is the path for regular feed operation. That means if no update is needed. Here, the security critical functions are disabled immediately so that the attacker doesn't have the chance anymore to take over control. These security critical functions are switching the HSM into suspend mode. I think I mentioned this already. Modify the HSM trusted boot table, which includes the software part definitions and the authenticity information. Unlock the code flash protections, which locks the primary bootloader, for example, and also start an HSM update. So in the update yes path, these security critical functions are required to perform the update and therefore cannot be deactivated immediately. So if an update is performed, the primary bootloader first performs an authentication request. This could incorporate the CycurHSM secure access feature or other cryptographic services. Once this authentication is successful, the environment is considered trusted. Now the user may unlock the code flash protections, perform the update, modify the trusted boot software part, definitions, and so on and so on. Depending on the exact system, there are different critical vulnerability points. The first attack point is to break the authentication at the beginning of this path. In real deployments, this authentication, which is defined by the OEMs with the PKI, is sometimes designed in a very simple way and can be broken by experienced attackers. This is the typical attack points, for example, for chip tuners. The next attack point is to break the hardware flash protection. Sometimes flash password protection is not available due to silicon constraints. In such a case, it is recommended to use a bootloader that is at least partially set to OTP. For example, critical part cannot be overwritten. Or to switch to the secure sequential boot if the timing of the startup allows it. When the attacker has got access and is able to update the trusted boot table, then he has got full control and might be even able to execute his own software at the next startup. This is now shown in an attack tree. So in general, if the host side code has vulnerabilities which allows to inject and execute code before security critical functions are disabled, then an attacker could play in software and mark that software as authentic. That means the whole trusted boot mechanism is overruled. In the attack tree here, the final target of the attacker is shown on top of the tree. So the final target is that to execute non-authentic software from the program flash. The most left path is the typical and most common attack path. It happens in case a debug interface has not been properly secured. So it is very important that the JTAG interface is locked. And also to keep the bootloader and boot manager as simple as possible. I can just repeat that. This will make it able to disable also security critical functions as early as possible. So there are, let's say, several attack successes. Writing or reading even could be much easier than writing. Writing to the RAM is still much easier for an attacker compared to executing from RAM. So for that, additional steps would be needed, which needs far more effort. The medium path here means that the bootloader is assuming the software as authentic, although it is not. In such a case, the bootloader will perform a normal update with the malicious code. It means the attacker has configured an update update container, which passes the authentication of the bootloader. This is the path shown on the previous slide, just from bottom to the top instead of from top to the bottom. So here it is really necessary to protect the regular software update, for example, by the secure access function of CycurHSM with strong cryptography. That means, for example, a challenge response scheme with your public key infrastructure, the PKI. The right path means the key or some other secret, for example, the authentication password or the flash protection password has been leaked or found out, for example, by a brute force attack or even by a physical attack. Means there is a vulnerability in the host application software. ECUs and also the target controllers are sometimes not really protected against physical attacks. Means if you have the ECU on your desk in a lab and the right equipment and the right knowledge and enough time, it is always possible to break in. It is just a matter of time and costs. However, the efforts are quite high to break in. So security, as you might know, is always a trade-off between the effort to break in and the damage which could be caused. So even when the secret is found out, it is still another complex, challenging step than to write to the flash, although the security critical functions are disabled. Recommendation here is to never use fleet-wide secrets, but ECU-specific secrets, and not to store the access passwords on the host side, but use the dedicated HSM features instead for it. So now I will come to a very special feature and mechanism, which is quite smart and available in the CycurHSM. The so-called trust anchor based on signatures, the TAPS feature. So far, we have just covered the standard trusted boot modes of CycurHSM. However, CycurHSM has even more features. One is the so-called TAPS feature. So the default function of TAPS is a fallback mechanism to the trusted boot in case trusted boot fails, for example, due to sporadic hardware errors. Sporadic hardware errors could lead to false positives, and this could make you think something is wrong, it means the ECU has been tampered, although nothing is wrong. So this feature, this fallback function, fulfills major OEM's security requirements. However, it also allows for a smart, seamless, easy, and very secure implementation for host software updates. Why very secure? This feature makes it possible that the primary bootloader does not need to write to the trusted boot table. That means the security critical function writing to the trusted boot table and update the authenticity information in the table can be disabled even earlier, and the primary bootloader can be kept even simpler and shorter. Why very easy? This I will explain on the next slide. Please note that this approach only works in case the memory layout is kept. However, this is the most regular and frequent case where a major software change where you really update the complete structure and the layout, the memory layout is more seldom. So here's the mechanism on the slide, how it is working. You receive some host software part which needs to be authenticated. A specific signature and a specific certificate is added to the block. The HSM calculates the CMAC over the software, the signature and the certificate, and compares it with the reference CMAC with symmetric cryptography, which is written into the trusted boot table. So here we willingly have not updated the authenticity information in advance in the trusted boot table. So what will happen when the CMAC check will start is that the check might fail. Even if we have exchanged or updated, if this is a authentic, let's say, software part with an authentic signature, because we haven't updated the authenticity information, this check will fail, which is shown here with the wrong red CMAC box. Of course, it could also fail because an attacker has changed the software part and the signature. So this path needs to be identified as well and reacted on. And this would be reacted in the same way. So a wrong CMAC will be detected. It could also be the sporadic CMAC hardware error. This is the default TAPS function. Now the TAPS fallback mechanism comes into play. Now, the TAPS feature verifies the signature against the certificate using the asymmetric cryptography. The certificate itself is verified against the root certificate which resides in the HSM. If this check is valid, although the check before failed, then the CMAC reference value is updated in the trusted boot table, and the update process is successfully done. The next trusted boot will pass the CMAC correctly, so that at the next time this fallback mechanism will not be triggered. This simplifies the implementation, so there's no need anymore to trigger the trusted boot update from the host side. It will be done by the HSM using the TAPS feature. Of course, now you can say that with this asymmetric cryptography, we have the real-time requirement, let's say, constraints, which might be not matching to the real-time startup requirements, which we discussed at the beginning. However, you can also actively trigger this process at any time by a verify software part function during operation. It means it is not bound to the startup and boot use case itself. So that means this security critical function, manipulate trusted boot, does not need to be activated. And you can do this function during the operation. And at next startup, the update of the trusted boot table has been already done autonomously without operation of the primary bootloader. And the next, let's say, startup time, again, the symmetric cryptography with the which fulfills the harsh real-time requirements is used. So CycurHSM provides more functions like secure access, secure flashing, and so on to support the whole update process, but this cannot be covered in the presentation today. We have to hurry up a little bit here now to leave some room for questions. So coming now to the real-life example. The real-life example here is an airbag application. This application had one non-negotiable requirement. The airbag ECU must be on the communication bus within 250 milliseconds. And within these 250 milliseconds, it was impossible to do a full secure boot, although it was required by the OEM originally. When discussing, it was found out that the airbag needs 1 second, so means 1000 milliseconds for arming, for the charging. So by this information, a requirement has been refined, or an additional refined requirement has been agreed with the customer and the end customer that the ECUs firmware must be authenticated after 600 milliseconds, while still the first message on the bus must be available within the 250 milliseconds. So here's now the way how it was realized and got acceptance from all stakeholders like safety managers, security managers. So the blue part on the left side is a must to keep the trust anchor up. So out of discussion, this means the HSM starts up first and is authenticating the primary bootloader before the host is started at all. So the host is held in suspend mode, and the primary bootloader partition is authenticated by the HSM, and then the host is released. In the green part, the security critical functions are disabled as soon as possible. However, it is then necessary to start to initialize the host application and the ECU application, which is here now shown in the red part, in parallel to starting the HSM checks. So the HSM will now authenticate the other software parts. So primary bootloader has been checked already, but all other software parts have not been checked. And this authentication needs some time, and due to the time needed, the authentication is not ready, although the host application must be started in order to make it possible that the host application already sends and receives messages on the bus. This is, of course, let's say critical also for security, because if we have malicious code on the host side, it could, let's say, manipulate something or also manipulate or control the HSM operation. And therefore, the mechanism here, the design, which has been solving this issue, is that the interrupts, the complete host HSM bridge, which consists of interrupts, lines, and let's say registers, has been disabled completely. So the HSM is completely isolated from the host and will not receive any messages from the host anymore. This is shown in the blue box, let's say, above. So that means the HSM, let's say, cannot be disturbed anymore and will continue with the checks. If the HSM say validates the software and finds out that the software is non-authentic, it will trigger a system reset of the complete ECU. And this is done within 600 milliseconds. That means before the airbag can be armed. And by this, the whole system, the airbag system, can be kept secure and also safe. So this approach is accepted by security and safety managers, will be used already by a major OEM. It is part of the main line of CycurHSM and can be also configured in the trusted boot table as a special software type, so-called authenticated boot with reset. Yeah, it's here explained with some additional words. I think I have went through it already. So let me now come to the conclusion. So ECU software updates are mandatory to keep security over the lifetime, but at the same time open doors for attackers. By a smart system design and the use of CycurHSM functions, the attack surface can be minimized. So there's no single answer and no single, let's say, timing requirement here, but a set of functions which you can use to fulfill your needs and to tailor the solution to your requirements. So the system design needs to be tailored to the actual needs and constraints within your specific project, taking into account the security, safety, and performance requirements. So that's all from my side. Thank you for your attention. And now we come to the Q&A session.
Yes, thank you, Raymond. We've got about 10 minutes or so for some audience Q&A. Just a reminder that if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by typing into the Q&A box on your screen. We've had a couple of questions just asking for some clarification on some of the terms. So one listener would like to know, what is the exact difference between authentic and secure boot?
Yeah, so maybe to explain it again, the authentic boot means that the HSM and the host will start in parallel. while in the secure boot, the host will be held in suspend and only be released when the HSM has authenticated the host program flash. That's the main difference. And this has, of course, the trade-offs for startup performance, security concept, and so on and so on.
Okay, thank you. Again, we've had a couple of questions on this. Is CycurHSM able to lock single keys in case of a failure, or only all keys?
CycurHSM is, of course, capable to lock single keys and to lock other secrets data. This can be configured by the key properties in the trusted boot table and in the secure key store per key. And this secure key store is also encrypted by a random ROM key from the silicon provider as an additional security layer.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. What will happen exactly if my host and HSM try to access the same memory location? Yeah,
this could have many reactions. It could cause, let's say, deadlocks or wrong operation. So this depends exactly on the silicon and what will be accessed when and so on. But this is, of course, a situation which, and of course, of the functions of the silicon. If you have, for example, read while write capabilities of that memory block or whatever. So what happens might differ, but of course, it's an undesired situation and should be avoided by all means. And that means, for example, you in your design, you must be careful that this is not happening. You can have, let's say, semaphores for that, or you can put the HSM into suspend mode, for example, or you can use some other design mechanisms to solve that.
Okay, thank you. Does the tabs fallback option use asymmetric cryptography? And if so, wouldn't the tabs option be too slow for the real-time requirements in startup?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, the tabs feature is using the asymmetric cryptography, and yes, it needs then more time. And that means, it could mean that at the startup, the tabs feature cannot be used because then the startup requirements will not be fulfilled anymore. Therefore, it's also possible to trigger the tabs feature during the operation, so that during the operation, when you have received a software update, you start the tabs feature, and this will autonomously, the HSM will then autonomously update the authenticity information in the HSM data flash, so that when you have the next, let's say, start cycle, the authenticity information is already updated, and then only the symmetric cryptography will be used, which is again fast and will fulfill your real-time requirements.
Okay, thank you. And I think you might be going over some points you made during your presentation, but one listener would like to know, what are all the functionalities that will be unavailable when we disable the HSM debug interface?
Yes, so you will not be able anymore to write to the trusted boot table. It won't be able to do an HSM update, which is, of course, also a security critical function. You cannot put the HSM into the HSM say suspend mode anymore. And maybe I've forgotten now something. I hope not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bit of a straightforward question here. What is the probability of random hardware failures of the AES engine?
Yeah, for that, usually you need to ask your silicon provider. They have statistical values for that. I would say it's in the magnitude, the probability is in the magnitude of 1, so exponent minus 12 or something like that. So it's rather low, but still, of course, you need to decide in your design if you can live with it or not. As I said, there are some OEMs which have defined such a fallback mechanism in their security requirements and for those sporadic hardware errors.
We've had some questions on timing. What are the timing restrictions for secure boot?
Yeah, for the full secure boot, you have basically a chain of functions which have to be done. First, the HSM must start up. Then the HSM must check all software parts. Depending on the size of your software, this could take quite a long time, even when you have a high-speed, high-end MCU here or microprocessor. Then the HSM needs to start the host, and then the host needs to initialize and do his checks also. And this is all in a sequential order and sums up to the complete timing needed for startup. And this time can be very long, and that's the reason why this full sequence approach, which is sometimes requested by OEMs in their security requirements, it does not match to the reality of today's available silicon and to the ECU price expectations from OEMs, for example. So here the compromise needs to be found, and usually when we discuss with the OEMs, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we have quite good contacts to the cybersecurity teams at all major OEMs. We can discuss it together with the tier one, and we will find a solution then which is acceptable from all sides.
Okay, thank you. Again, I think you may have touched on this. Is there a concept for an authenticated boot failure with the software performing a limp home mode?
A limp home mode? I don't understand. Sorry, what is meant by a limp home mode?
So to the point where it's just about functional with minimal capabilities if something goes wrong.
Yeah, this is also possible. No? So it is even possible in this, let's say, gracious mode that you even start the host, but you lock away some secrets, some keys or some secrets, so that no damage can be done. Now, this is also possible. It doesn't make sense to have only the HSM running if something fails, because the HSM has not much connection to the externals. That means it could not, might not be able to put the system into in a safe state, for example. So this might have to be done on the host side. And therefore, if the HSM, let's say, can lock away keys and secrets and deactivate functions, also deactivate, of course, the security critical functions, but then start the host, and the host can do those, let's say, for example, safety measures, but he cannot do much more. So the damage which could be caused is limited or protected.
Okay, and one listener would just like a clarification on one of the points you made during the presentation. The question is, what did you mean by secrets are not protected for some time in case of authenticated boot? Aren't they only accessible by the HSM? Do you have anything, any follow-up to that?
Yeah, in principle, at that short time period, the HSM is already in the core mode. In core mode means it has the full API is enabled, the full functionality is enabled. That means the host could, via the API, access all functions and could also, for example, read out keys if the key properties allow it. You can inject or read out the keys in if the key properties, let's say, allow it. Then.
Okay, brilliant. I see we've got a few other questions in the queue. Perhaps they can be followed up with on offline. We've come to the top of the hour, so I think we can bring this webinar to a close now. I'd like to thank Raymond for sharing his insight with us today and Escrypt for helping to make the event possible. Please note that today's presentation slides and an on-demand version of this webinar will soon be made available. But that's all for today's session, so thank you all for listening and goodbye for now.